My name is Claire Dawson. I am 29 years old, and I know what it feels like to mistake a lie for love. I wasn't born with silver spoons or lakeside estates. I grew up in a small town just outside Charleston, raised by a widowed florist who taught me that love, if nothing else, should be honest. My childhood home smelled of lavender and glue, and the walls bore hand-stitched quotes about kindness. It was quaint, warm, and honest, everything the world outside was not. I met Preston Langford when I was 22, waitressing part-time at Heller's Bistro while finishing bookkeeping classes at the community college. He came in wearing tailored coats, cufflinks that glinted like coins, and a laugh that made you want to lean closer. He was a guest, and I was just the server who remembered his coffee order. He told me I had eyes like storms, intense, untamed, unforgettable. I thought he was just another rich boy playing with words, but then he returned, again and again, until those return visits turned into shared walks, late-night talks, and a slow-burning connection I mistook for fate. Preston said he wanted someone real, not the daughters of politicians and CEOs. He told me once, "I'm tired of people who only smile for the society pages." I believed him. For 2 years, we dated quietly. He said his parents wouldn't approve of our relationship, not because I wasn't good enough, but because they wouldn't understand. "Old money can be cruel," he whispered once, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Let's just have something that's ours." So we met in tucked-away corners, celebrated our own version of holidays. I baked him pies. He brought me books bound in leather. One Valentine's Day, he gave me a ring in a velvet box. Simple, gold, a modest diamond, not grand but intimate. "I don't want this to be a spectacle," he had said. "Just a promise. Our promise." I wore that ring for months like it was a shield, a whisper of something sacred. He promised we'd make it official soon, after he settled some family business. Then came the silence. He stopped showing up. Calls went unanswered. I left notes with the bistro hostess. Days turned to weeks. My worry turned to dread, and dread hardened into suspicion. Finally, I boarded a bus to the Langford estate, 3 towns over. Dressed in my best coat, I walked up the long driveway and saw the red and gold banners first. "Congratulations, Preston and Madeline engaged to be." My heart didn't break. It imploded. I made it just in time to see the two of them waving. From the mansion's grand staircase, Preston's hand rested gently on Madeline's back. She wore a flawless sapphire ring that must have cost more than my entire childhood home. I felt like a fool. Worse than that, I felt disposable. I left before they saw me, but not before I learned the truth. The ring he gave me? Fake. Costume jewelry, according to a local appraiser I visited days later. Plastic stone, brass setting, maybe even borrowed. I didn't cry that night. I just stood in front of my mirror and pulled the ring off my finger like it was a splinter, and I made myself a promise. I wouldn't send a letter. I wouldn't beg for an explanation. I would wait. I would build. And when the time was right, I would return, not with a broken heart, but with power. 5 years later, the Langfords listed their estate as quietly available. Their fortune had begun to crumble. Bad deals, family debts, and internal squabbles. The dream mansion Preston and Madeline had once gushed about was now a burden. So I bought it. Cash. The entire mansion. Every wing and fountain and staircase mine. And Valentine's Day was coming. The papers were signed on the 1st of February. The same drawing room where Preston had once toasted his engagement now bore my name on every deed and ledger. The chandelier above my head sparkled like it knew the full story. The Langfords had no idea who the buyer was, only that a private investor, under a newly formed trust called Veritas Holdings, had purchased the estate in full. No negotiation, no counteroffer, just a quiet, complete buyout. And that's exactly how I wanted it. The staff stayed. I kept every gardener, housekeeper, and valet employed, paying them better wages than the Langfords ever did. I didn't want revenge on the people who trimmed roses or polished chandeliers. They had nothing to do with what happened to me. But I wanted every detail to be ready, flawless, for what came next. On February 10th, I sent out the invitations. "You are cordially invited to the Valentine's Eve soiree at Dawson Estate. Black tie, champagne service, live jazz, no gifts, just memories." I sent one to every name on the Langfords' old socialite mailing list, including Preston and Madeline. I knew they'd attend. Curious people always do. I picked out a dress the color of crushed garnets, My hair was swept into a bun that whispered elegance and control. A vintage ring, not a fake one, gleamed from my finger. It was sapphire, just like hers. Guests began arriving at 7. Limousines lined the circular drive. I greeted each one. From the top of the stairs, the very same spot where Madeline once waved like a pageant queen, nobody recognized me at first. It had been 5 years. Gone was the shy girl with quiet eyes and calloused hands. In her place stood a woman who carried herself like silk wrapped around steel. At precisely 8 o'clock, Preston walked in. He didn't see me right away. He was too busy admiring the ballroom, now remodeled with a grand piano, cascading florals, and tall candlelit candelabras. He leaned toward Madeline, whispering something I couldn't hear, and then our eyes met. For a heartbeat, confusion, then recognition, then something else, panic. The kind a man feels when he realizes he's about to drown, but the tide's already over his shoulders. I descended the staircase slowly. "Claire," he said. I smiled. "Preston." He cleared his throat. "This is your party?" "No," I said lightly, turning toward the ballroom. "This is my home." Madeline blinked, like she'd stepped into the wrong film. "You live here?" "I own it," I said. Her mouth fell open. Preston tried to laugh. "You're joking." "No," I walked past him toward the grand fireplace. "You see, when people hand out plastic rings, they forget some girls turn plastic into fire. And fire? It builds empires." He followed me, stammering. "Claire, listen, whatever happened. I was young, you were cruel." I cut in, voice soft but sharp. And I was silent, but not anymore. Madeline, now pale, reached for his arm. "I told you we shouldn't have come." But she didn't know, Preston said quickly, turning back to me. "You didn't. You couldn't have known the mansion was ours." "Oh, Preston," I chuckled. "Not only did I know, it's why I bought it." I motioned to the staff to begin the toast. Glasses clinked as waiters moved through the crowd. I stepped onto the small stage beside the pianist and raised a flute of champagne. "Thank you all for being here," I said, "especially those from Charleston society. This house used to belong to a different name, a name that stood for pretense and illusion." There were murmurs in the crowd. I let them brew. But tonight, it belongs to someone else. To someone who remembers what it's like to be lied to be told you're not enough. Someone who knows how to turn heartbreak into a housewarming. Preston shifted, visibly sweating. "And to those wondering, yes, this is that Claire Dawson, the one who wore a fake engagement ring for a year, while the man who gave it planned a wedding with someone else." Madeline gasped. A few guests turned in their direction. Preston tried to leave, but the valet had locked the gates for the toast. And finally, I continued, "To make tonight truly memorable, I'd like to dedicate this house to every woman who's ever mistaken a performance for a promise. You're not alone, and you're not powerless." The crowd erupted in applause. I sipped my champagne. Preston didn't even finish his. He was already halfway to the door. And Valentine's Day was still tomorrow. Valentine's Day arrived in a storm of pink envelopes and red silk ribbons across Charleston. The Dawson estate, yes, that's what everyone was calling it now, was the talk of every club, salon, and supper table from Willow Creek to Belmont Hills. The town hadn't seen a party like mine in decades, but while the social world buzzed, I sat quietly in the library, sipping tea and reading the Charleston Herald. Headline: Local heiress hosts Valentine's Gala at Langford Estate. Reveals identity in stunning public speech. Below was a black and white photograph of me on the stage, champagne flute in hand. You could see Preston in the corner, half turned, face pale. The caption read, "Claire Dawson delivers toast of a lifetime." They got one thing right. That toast was just the beginning. You see, revenge wasn't my endgame. It never had been. My goal wasn't to humiliate Preston or Madeline. It was to remind myself and every girl who's ever believed in a lie that heartbreak doesn't get the final say. We do, but still, the universe has a curious way of offering opportunities. And mine came the next morning. I was in the greenhouse, checking on a new bed of tulips, when Miss Linden, my assistant, came rushing in, nearly tripping over the marble tiles. "Claire," she said breathlessly, "you'll want to see this." She handed me a letter. The envelope was heavy, handwritten, Langford family crest stamped on the back. Inside was a desperate plea from Preston's father, William Langford, head of Langford Bancorp. He requested a private meeting, urgent and discreet. I smiled. By 4 o'clock, I was seated across from him in his paneled office. He wore a red tie and the same expression his son had worn at the gala forced confidence under a layer of regret. "Miss Dawson," he began, "I believe, you know, our family is experiencing financial turbulence." I nodded. "So I've heard." He cleared his throat. "I've also heard you've made significant acquisitions lately." "I have." He leaned forward, lacing his fingers. "Langford Bancorp is in need of capital. You've always had an interest in property. Perhaps it's time to consider banking." I let the silence stretch until it stung. Then I said, "You want me to save your legacy?" He winced. "I want to make a deal." I studied him. This was the same man who once told Preston that marrying a girl from dust would lower the Langford name. He'd once called my father's small furniture shop a shack with sawdust dreams. Now here he was begging the daughter of that same man for a lifeline. Oh, how time spins her little wheel. "I'll consider it," I said, rising. "But I don't buy pieces. If I buy something, I buy it all." He nodded stiffly. "Understood." As I walked to the door, he added quietly, "You know, Claire, you've changed." I turned back, soft smile in place. "No, Mr. Langford. I just stopped letting men with money define my worth." That evening, I reviewed the bank's financials. My team had already started negotiations through a third-party shell company I'd created months earlier. Back then, it was just a fantasy, a whisper of vengeance I never truly believed I'd use. But now, it was real and poetic. On February 14th, exactly 1 year after Preston had slipped that fake ring into my hand, I signed the final agreement. Langford Bancorp, the family's crown jewel, was mine. I didn't change the name. I didn't fire the staff, but I did redecorate the executive office. The first thing I placed on the desk? A glass case. Inside it, the fake proposal ring. Beneath it, a silver plaque. "Not all promises are meant to be broken." CD the morning after I signed the Langford Bancorp deal, the air felt different, crisper, like something had shifted permanently. I wasn't just Claire Dawson from the outskirts of Ashfield anymore. I was the woman who now held the keys to everything they once lorded over me. But I wasn't done, because I had promised myself something the night Preston gave me that hollow, glitterless ring. One day, I'll own the story they wrote me out of. That story still had one more chapter, and it came knocking in pearls and crocodile heels. Madeline. Yes, that Madeline. The one who wore a 6-carat Marquise diamond like it was a trophy. The girl who once twirled across ballroom floors with my fiancé on her arm while I stood on the sidewalk, watching through stained glass windows. Now she stood in my foyer. "Claire," she said, the corners of her mouth forced into a smile. "Do you have a moment?" I stepped aside, gesturing her in. We sat across from each other in the drawing room of the Langford mansion, the mansion that once belonged to her family. Her gaze flitted around, as if unable to reconcile the embroidered CD monograms with the gold-edged portraits of her ancestors that I hadn't taken down yet. "I suppose congratulations are in order," she said, smoothing her gloves. "It seems you've acquired quite a bit." I offered nothing but a calm smile. She leaned in. "Preston's been drinking again. My parents are, well, you know, bitter. The town talks, but I'm not here for gossip." "Then why are you here, Madeline?" She hesitated, then pulled a pink envelope from her purse and set it on the table between us. "This was supposed to be our wedding invitation, Valentine's Day. But the estate you bought, this estate was where we were going to host the ceremony. You knew that." "I did," I said softly. She blinked. "So, you meant to ruin us." I picked up the envelope. It smelled like peonies and desperation. "Madeline, when Preston gave me that fake ring, you knew." Her jaw stiffened. "You knew it was fake. You knew he wasn't serious. But you let him string me along for months while the two of you laughed about it behind closed doors. That was his idea," she said quickly. "Maybe. But you wore the diamond, didn't you?" She looked away. I stood and crossed to the window, where the winter sun cast sharp lines through antique glass. Outside, a team of gardeners worked to plant new rose bushes where Madeline's mother once held summer luncheons. "I'm not here to gloat," I said, "or to ruin your wedding. You've done a fine job of that on your own." "Then why buy this house?" she asked quietly. "Why take everything?" I turned slowly. "Because I wanted the same view," I said. "The same chandeliers, the same gardens. I wanted to feel what it was like to be chosen not just by a man, but by fate. And now that I have it, I realize I never needed it to begin with." She stood to leave, her posture still perfect, but her voice cracked as she said, "You'll never be one of us, Claire." I smiled gently. "I know, that's the best part." As she walked out, my phone rang. It was a reporter from the Ashfield Courier, requesting an interview for their Valentine's Day edition. They wanted a feature on the girl who bought her ex's dreams. I declined the interview, but I did send them a handwritten quote. "Love didn't break me, betrayal did. But revenge taught me how to build." They ran it on the front page, and beneath it, a full-color ad for a gala to be held at the Dawson estate. "You are cordially invited to celebrate new beginnings," hosted by Claire Dawson, February 14th, 7 p.m. sharp. Dress code, everything you were told you couldn't wear. And in the corner of the invite, printed in silver foil, the tagline I now lived by, "Your ring was fake. My empire isn't." Valentine's Day arrived cloaked in snow, the kind of soft hush that made everything look cleaner, newer. I watched the flurries settle over the estate's marble steps and trimmed hedges from the master balcony, my balcony now. The ballroom below buzzed with final preparations for the gala. The chandeliers glittered brighter than I remembered. The waitstaff wore black velvet. Dozens of rose arrangements lined the walls, each one a different shade of red, like a timeline of heartbreak from blush denial to blood-deep betrayal. This wasn't a party. It was a declaration. Every invite had gone out weeks ago. Some arrived with trembling hands. Others sent cold refusals. A few, like Preston and Madeline, chose silence. But one name surprised me: Grayson Blake. I hadn't seen Grayson since the day Preston gave me that fake proposal ring. Back then, Grayson was a quiet bystander, Preston's friend, the thoughtful one with kind eyes who'd once helped me carry groceries to my car when the others laughed. I always wondered why he kept his distance, why he watched everything, but said so little. But his RSVP was the first to arrive. And he didn't just check the yes, he sent a handwritten note. "I know who you were. I can't wait to meet who you've become." By 7 p.m., the ballroom shimmered with candlelight and uncomfortable elegance. People arrived in silks and sequins, their expressions caught between admiration and unease. They were walking into a house that shouldn't have belonged to a girl like me. And yet it did. I stood at the top of the grand staircase in a custom crimson gown stitched by my own design house. The silk hugged my frame like confidence made tangible. My hair was pinned with diamond combs, not for wealth but for memory. The center gem was set with the same stone Preston had once glued onto that fake ring, reclaimed. A hush fell as I descended the staircase. Not a word was spoken, just glances, rising like heat from the crowd. Then a slow, polite applause. I gave a speech, brief and brutal. "Tonight isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about truth. I was once made to feel I wasn't enough. I believed a lie wrapped in a velvet box. But the best lies," I paused, scanning the room, "are the ones that wake you up." Later, near the ice sculpture centerpiece, I spotted him, Grayson. He stood by the champagne table, looking exactly as I remembered: tall, modest suit, a hint of mischief in his eyes. When I approached, he smiled like he'd been waiting a decade just to say one sentence: "You were never the girl they tried to paint you as," he said, "and you never tried to warn me." I replied gently. "I did," he said, lowering his voice. "The day after he gave you that ring, I left a note with the truth. Gave it to Madeline." My stomach tightened. "She never gave it to me," I said. "I figured as much." We stood in silence for a breath, and then, out of nowhere, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with time. "I kept the duplicate," he said. "I couldn't throw it away. I guess I was hoping one day you'd be strong enough not just to read it but to know you never needed it." I took the envelope. Inside was a note, simple, typed on a typewriter. "Claire, the ring's fake. He's playing you. I wish I had the courage to say this in person. You deserve real." G looked up, breath hitched. Grayson wasn't just a bystander. He was the only one who didn't play pretend. I folded the letter and tucked it into my clutch, my eyes meeting his. "You're late," I said softly. He smiled. "Better late than never." The music swelled. Guests danced. But Grayson and I stood still, two survivors of a cruel story that was finally ours to rewrite. Outside, beneath the front portico, Preston's black car idled briefly. A driver stepped out, looked up at the estate, and returned to the vehicle. He never came in, because some doors don't open twice, and some girls don't stay broken. The party began to fade around midnight. The velvet curtains were drawn, the music softened, and guests trickled out in a fog of perfume and gossip. but I stayed. In the quiet, I walked the halls alone, room by room, each echo a memory stitched with both hurt and resolve. This place, once a symbol of everything I'd never have, now stood as proof that I could build anything they said I couldn't. But something inside me remained unsettled. Preston and Madeline never stepped inside. Cowards often don't. They send their silence instead. I expected that. What I didn't expect was the letter waiting for me in the library. A pale pink envelope. My name in looping cursive. Claire.no return address. No handwriting I recognized. The seal, however, was all too familiar, a tiny crest engraved with 3 roses. Madeline's family emblem. I opened it with careful fingers. The letter smelled like expensive perfume and stale guilt. You've made your point, Claire. This house was always meant to be mine. But don't let revenge eat you alive. I have what you'll never have, Preston's heart. Even if the ring was fake, the love wasn't. You're welcome to the mansion. I hope its walls echo. I let the letter fall to the floor. She still didn't get it. This was never about real estate. It was about truth, dignity, and the part of me they crushed when they thought I wouldn't fight back. But her note made something very clear. They still thought this was just about a house. So I decided to give them a finale they'd never forget. 2 weeks later, the town's paper ran a full-page ad. The Dawson Foundation presents the Valentine Gala for Hope. Location: the Eastvale Rosewood Estate. Beneficiaries: local women's shelter, recovery programs, and single mothers and educationees. I renamed the mansion. And yes, I invited every major socialite in the region, including the same circle Preston and Madeline still desperately clawed their way through. The gala would be held on Valentine's Day, under the theme, "Not everything that glitters is real." Subtle? No, necessary? Absolutely. On the morning of the event, a delivery arrived at Preston's father's investment firm, a gilded envelope containing 2 VIP tickets and a personal invitation. I knew Preston wouldn't resist. Not because of sentiment but status. If the elite were gathering, he'd crawl through glass to be seen there. And they did show. Late, of course. Fashionably arrogantly late. Madeline wore crimson silk and pearls. Preston donned a velvet tux, the same smug tilt to his mouth. They walked in hand like they still ruled a world that forgot about them. But they froze when they saw the banner over the ballroom arch. To every girl ever handed something fake, this night is yours. Madeline's face paled. Preston's fingers tightened around her arm. I met them at the top of the staircase. "Welcome to my home," I said, voice smooth as satin. "I see you brought the real diamond this time." Preston opened his mouth. No words came. I turned to Madeline. "Lovely to see you again. Would you like a tour? The East Wing has the nursery you wanted." Her jaw clenched. "This is low, Claire." "No," I said. "This is closure." She turned to leave, dragging Preston behind her. But I wasn't done. "Wait," I called after them. "Before you go." I held up a velvet ring box. Madeline narrowed her eyes. Inside wasn't a ring but a single brass washer, spray-painted gold, exactly like the one Preston gave me once. The crowd behind us didn't understand, but the 2 of them did. Instantly, Madeline gasped. Preston flushed crimson. "I kept the original," I said softly. "Sometimes trash reminds you how far you've come." They left without a word. The room applauded. They didn't even know why, but they knew they'd witnessed something important. Something poetic. I turned away from the door. Grayson stood near the piano, watching with the kind of expression that made you feel whole again. "You planned all this?" he asked as I approached. "No," I said. "I became it." We danced. No declarations, no ring, no promises. Just 2 people who knew how cruel the world could be and how sweet it felt to rise above it. The morning after the gala, sunlight poured through the tall bay windows of the estate's master suite, once called the engagement wing in the real estate brochure. I had rechristened it the room of real things. No portraits of couples, smiling for show. Just bare walls, warm rugs, and one sturdy writing desk. I sat there that morning, still in my evening gown, sipping coffee that tasted like liberation. The papers buzzed with headlines: "Unknown heiress to thrones, Eastvale royalty. The girl with the washer ring buys the mansion of dreams, Claire Dawson." From betrayed to beloved, my name was on everyone's lips, but not because of gossip. Because of grit. I never imagined I'd be the center of attention in a world that once forgot I existed. But here I was. And the strangest part, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Revenge is sweet, but it's not filling. It quiets the past but doesn't always build a future. And as I looked out across the rose garden I had once only seen through iron gates, I realized something. I had spent so long proving I was more than what they said I was. I hadn't thought about what I truly wanted. That thought stayed with me for weeks. Grayson visited often after the gala, never pressuring, always kind. He brought books, pastries, stories from the shelter. He never asked about Preston or Madeline again. He never had to. One afternoon, I found him reading a letter aloud to a group of women at the shelter. A letter I had written years ago, right after Preston humiliated me. A letter I never mailed. To the girl who feels forgotten. They may give you lies dressed in gold. They may laugh at your honesty. But don't trade your truth for their comfort. One day, they'll see your name written in lights and you won't need their spotlight to shine. He looked up, saw me at the door, and smiled. You left it in the community donation box, he said, holding it up gently. I thought they'd like it. I blinked back tears. That letter was never meant for anyone else. Yet somehow, it had become a lifeline for others. And maybe that's what I had to do now, not just close old wounds, but offer bandages to those still bleeding. That night, I stood in the great hall of the Rosewood estate and made a choice. The mansion wouldn't be my personal trophy. It would become the Dawson House for Restoration, a free creative residency and recovery space for women who had faced betrayal, hardship, or abandonment. Pain was real, but healing could be louder. I signed the conversion papers myself. No gala, no cameras. Just me, a pen, and a beating heart that finally felt light again. 2 days later, I received a letter. No envelope, just a folded piece of parchment, left on my doorstep. It was from Preston. Claire, you were right. I was a coward. I gave you something fake because I couldn't believe someone like you would ever want someone like me. Madeline is gone. She left the day after your gala. The mansion, the washer ring, the gala speech, every bit of it hit harder than you know. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that the only real thing I ever had was the part of you I threw away. I read the letter 3 times, then I burned it in the fireplace. Some stories deserve closure, not sequels. I walked outside into the crisp air of February. The sky was the kind of blue you only see in stories. A child played in the garden, tracing shapes with her gloved hands in the snow-dusted hedges. She looked up at me and asked, "Is this your castle?" I smiled. "No," I said. "It's our beginning." Because finally, I wasn't living in revenge. I was living in purpose. To be continued on page 8. Next, Claire's foundation faces a threat from the same banking board that once backed Preston's family. Will she protect what she built or sacrifice it to protect others like her? A few weeks after the Dawson House for Restoration was officially launched, I found myself seated in a mahogany-paneled boardroom overlooking Eastvale's financial district. Across the table sat men whose names appeared on plaques, donation halls, and political banners. Men who once toasted Preston's family every Christmas with cigars and bourbon. They were bankers, mostly. Old money legacy types with diamond cufflinks and minds too narrow to dream. One of them, Mr. Halloran, tapped his fingers as he read over the deed transfer documents for the mansion-turned-foundation. "This property," he said, "used to be a staple of Eastvale's prestige. Now you've turned it into a halfway house." I didn't flinch. "No, Mr. Halloran, I've turned it into a future." He chuckled, eyes cold. "Be that as it may, Miss Dawson, we've reviewed the trust's allocations. You've rerouted every asset that used to fund the Preston estate into nonprofit programs. That's not exactly the type of investment our bank prefers." There it was. They weren't just old friends of Preston's family, they were the ones who funded the lavish lifestyle, backed the estate, and enjoyed the perks of association. And now that I owned the mansion and had cut their financial strings, they were looking for a way to reel me back in. "What is it you're proposing?" I asked. Another man slid a file across the table. "We'll restore the original estate name and allow limited public access as a museum and event venue. In return, your trust will receive annual grants discreetly, of course. No public strings attached." Translation: they wanted their names on the wall, their events back in the ballroom, and my silence in return. I stared at the file. Glossy pages, impressive numbers, polite blackmail. "No," I said simply. "Miss Dawson," Halloran said, voice thinning, "this is a legacy we're offering to preserve." "I'm not interested in preserving old legacies," I replied. "I'm building new ones." That night, I walked back through the halls of Dawson House. The chandelier overhead flickered with golden light, casting soft shadows on the restored murals and hardwood floors. In one room, a young woman was playing piano, one of the residents. She used to write music but had her manuscript burned by an abusive fiancé. Now, she was composing again. In another wing, two sisters, both runaways, were painting murals of wildflowers on the walls. One of them had been rejected by her family after choosing a different path. Here, no one judged her colors, and in the garden, I found Grayson sitting on the stone bench, sketching something. He didn't notice me right away. "What are you drawing?" I asked. He smiled without looking up. "A gate, but not the kind that keeps people out." I sat beside him, shivering slightly in the breeze. "They want to take this away," I said, quietly, "not because it's wrong, but because it makes them irrelevant." He nodded. "That's how you know you're doing something right." I exhaled. "It's not just revenge anymore, Grayson. It's something more, something I want to protect." He looked at me, eyes warm. "Then fight for it. But this time, don't fight with fire. Fight with foundation." I looked back at the mansion. Not as a trophy, not as a wound healed, but as a beacon. Something worth defending, not just for me, but for the women who had walked through its doors carrying broken dreams. The next morning, I declined the bank's proposal in writing, and I sent every board member a copy of a new city petition, the Eastvale Empowerment Act, pushing for protections and grants for foundations like mine across the county. It wasn't where. It was a movement, and this time, the girl with the fake ring wasn't alone. The Eastvale Gazette hit newsstands with a bold headline: "Heiress turns Preston mansion into revenge home, former fiancé breaks silence." Below it, a perfectly framed photograph of me standing on the stone steps of Dawson House, face calm, eyes forward, followed by a full-page op-ed written by none other than Preston Miller himself. I held the newspaper in one hand and a mug of black coffee in the other. The ink was barely dry, but the slander stung as if it had been carved. "Claire Dawson was once the sweetest girl in town," Preston had written. "But money changes people. I don't begrudge her success, but I do mourn what she's done with it. Our home, our dreams twisted into a shrine for spite." I stared at the word "our" for a long time. Our home, our dreams. He made it sound like we had been partners. Like he hadn't ripped a piece of my heart out, handed me a fake ring, and announced his engagement to another girl within days. Like I hadn't watched him pour wine over plans we made together and say it was all a game. And yet, now he was the victim. I dropped the paper and paced the garden. Each step fell heavy on the gravel path, the early spring roses trembling slightly in the wind. Inside the house, I could hear Grayson arguing with someone over the phone. "They're threatening to freeze the nonprofit's accounts," he said, voice low. "Yes, I've seen the article." "No, she didn't mismanage funds. The foundation is spotless." Another smear, another blow. That afternoon, we held an emergency meeting with the trustees. Among them was June Eddington, a retired professor who had joined the cause after her own daughter was thrown out of school for reporting harassment. She tapped her pen on the table, looking straight at me. "This isn't about one article," she said. "This is about power, and how scared they are of losing it." The board murmured in agreement, but someone had to speak the truth. "They'll come after the programs next," I said. "The art therapy wing, the housing grants, maybe even the staff. Anything they can discredit, they will." Grayson leaned forward. "Let them. We'll counter it with light, with stories, with every life this house has touched." But just then, a messenger from the county courthouse arrived with an envelope, official, wax-sealed, and damning. Inside, a lawsuit filed by Preston's fiancée's family, claiming I'd used deceptive tactics to purchase the estate. They were asking the judge to reverse the sale. It was absurd, baseless, and dangerous, because power doesn't always play fair, especially not when it's embarrassed. That night, I walked through the empty theater of my past, quiet, candlelit memories echoing in the corners of Dawson House. I stopped in the old ballroom, once meant for a wedding. My wedding. Instead of tears, I whispered to the room. They want to erase everything I've built, because it reminds them of what they destroyed. Behind me, Grayson entered quietly. "I have to show you something," he said. He handed me a weathered envelope, yellowed at the edges. I found it in the archives. Preston's father kept handwritten contracts and receipts for years. "This one proves something big." I opened it, a land agreement signed and notarized showing that the estate had actually been part of the Dawson family's holdings before. Preston's grandfather sold it under legal duress. In short, they had stolen it from us. Years ago, Preston hadn't just broken my heart, his family had stolen my legacy. Now it was justice. And no longer revenge. To be continued on page 10. Up next, Claire walks into the courtroom with the ultimate proof in hand. But her final move won't just expose the lies, it'll seal her legacy in a way no one expected. The courtroom was freezing, not because of the weather, but because of the stairs. Old Eastvale was there in full elites in tailored wool coats, silvered hair pulled into tight buns, family names carved into courthouses and charities. The Millers occupied the front bench, Preston with his jaw clenched, his fiancée dabbing the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief. I didn't flinch. I wore navy, not for them, but for the girl I used to be, the one who once held a fake ring like it meant forever. The judge, a seasoned man with deep lines and a reputation for impartiality, shuffled through the case file. He adjusted his spectacles, then glanced at me. Miss Dawson, he said, you may proceed with your statement. I stood. My name is Claire Dawson. I am 29 years old. I was born 5 blocks from the estate in question. My father was a caretaker. My mother was a librarian. We had little, but we had pride. I looked over at Preston. In my early 20s, I was given a ring. I believed it meant love, a future, belonging. It did not. It was fake, a token in a game I didn't realize I was part of. There was a rustle in the audience. I didn't pause. Years later, I returned to Eastvale not for vengeance, but to rebuild what had been taken from my family. This property was part of the original Dawson estate until it was sold under duress during a financial crisis and quietly absorbed into the Miller holdings. I reached into my briefcase and lifted the yellowed contract. This document signed in 1952 proves that my great-grandfather was forced to sell the estate to cover debts created by the very bank the Millers now own. The transfer was predatory and legally questionable. Today, that injustice ends. The judge took the paper and examined it carefully. His brows lifted slightly as he read the notarization. Behind me, Grayson spoke. We also submitted an independent assessment of the property's historical chain of ownership. It validates Miss Dawson's claim and further discredits the basis of this lawsuit. The judge nodded. He turned to Preston's attorney. Do you dispute the validity of this evidence? A long pause, then a low answer. No, Your Honor. A moment of silence fell over the courtroom. Then the gavel struck once. Case dismissed. Property ownership stands. All counterclaims denied. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. But I turned, looked Preston in the eye, and gave him the faintest nod. Nod of forgiveness, of finality. After court, reporters surrounded the steps, microphones in hand, cameras flashing. Miss Dawson, was this revenge? I leaned forward slightly. No, I said. This was reclamation. This house was built on my family's sweat, my father's loyalty, and my mother's memory. I simply returned what was ours and made sure no one else would be tricked by a ring with no weight. That evening, Dawson House glowed with life. We held an engagement party, not mine, but for 2 young educators who ran a literacy program in the city's poorest districts. They'd been saving for a venue, struggling for months. I gave them the ballroom. It was decorated in soft rose and gold. I walked through the crowd, glass of apple cider in hand, feeling whole for the first time in years. Grayson found me near the fireplace. Everything's in motion, he said. And I don't just mean legal stuff. You changed this town. No, I replied. I just reminded it who built it. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Inside, music swirled and laughter danced through the halls. In the corner of the ballroom, an antique glass case held a single object, the wooden ring Preston had once given me. Nestled inside red velvet, a small plaque beneath it read, "Sometimes, the most beautiful lies make way for the strongest truths." Claire Dawson. Final reflections. Do you think Claire's victory was complete, or did she leave room for grace? Was the courtroom the true climax, or was it the ballroom in the end? Subscribe to more revenge stories. Share, like, comment.